Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Veronica Shleina, and I'm a lecturer in law at the University of Westminster. Thank you for having me today. I think it's a very, very exciting and very useful topic that we are touching upon today. So what I did for my presentation, I have provided some sort of a twist to it, and I have introduced some of the findings and some of the discussions that I have done for my PhD research, which I thankfully successfully completed in September. So what we'll be talking to in today's presentation is I will provide some contextual background in relation to the relationship between work and reproduction, and consider if there are any shifts from more child-oriented families to more work-oriented families. And I will also discuss whether, excuse me, what surrogacy is, and if it could help address some of the issues that are being faced by families, especially when the shift from career orientation to family orientation happens quite late. So we know that the data suggests that a family seeking to the couple that seeks to start a family, including children, quite late in terms of the medical terms, means that there might be some health issues, including infertility. So the question is whether surrogacy may offer viable solutions to some of these issues. I will also discuss some ethical considerations in relation to surrogacy, but my mini conclusion is that it does, despite being quite ethically controversial in some instances, what it does help people have genetically related offspring. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions later on, because I do value the views, and I'm quite curious what the public might think about surrogacy in general and surrogacy as a way to address the issues of infertility. Right. So the question of work-life balance has become particularly acute recently. So we've seen in the news headlines, YouTube, podcasts, as well as well-being articles. They raise the issue of work-related burnout, imposter syndrome. So all these buzzwords that we can spot in relation to work. So some employees argue that work-life balance is completely unachievable. So whilst it does achieve a lot of consideration, it's actually completely unachievable. And if one works to be successfully climbing up the career ladder, the non-work related distractions, and this is what unfortunately family and children may be seen sometimes as, distractions need to be minimized. So while some families focus fully on work, others insist that life is very multidimensional and it should be evolving around career only. So what determines work-life balance? Work-life balance may be seen as some sort of a healthy cycle between work life and private life. So for example, productive work, appreciation, and social working environment are not fully independent from the joys of private life. So in fact, they enrich each other, and there are many aspects that determine the quality of work-life balance. So there is an ability to pursue career progression while still having free time to dedicate oneself to hobbies, gym, travel, family, including children. So some claim that family as well as children, they're a very important part of the achievement of work-life balance. However, this stance is not unanimous, and some see children as it interferes with their careers, and nearly 2 in 5 mothers, so that's around 38%, that were surveyed by YouGov data collectors, said that having kids has unfortunately harmed their career. So there is a completely opposite model that is based on the idea of having children over career approach. Sometimes that's seen quite patriarchal and outdated. This approach implies that women's role is fulfilled not through the realization of career ambitions, but providing high standards of childcare and rearing as many children as possible. So, for example, in 2012, Kate Winslet was invested by the Queen as a commander of the Order of the British Empire, and during their brief chat, the actress told the monarch that she loves being a mom, and to which the Queen is said to have replied somewhat wistfully, "Yes, that's the only job that matters." Some scholars also suggest that for the role of motherhood to be fulfilled, one child is not enough. There must be at least at least two, because what the family should be seeking to achieve is also apart from the family having one child, but the child to have a sibling, someone to grow up with. That is not to say that working mothers are not the norm. And in some parts of the globe, they used to be the norm. So, for example, in Eastern Europe, so the idealization of the role of a mother may be attributable to culture to some extent. So in Eastern Europe, for example, being a working mom was the norm, but it was the motherhood itself, it was the motherhood of the working mother that's being seen as an attachment to womanhood. So, for example, in communist states, motherhood was rewarded by various state awards and substantial benefits, and depending on how many children the mother raised, she could also receive the award of mother heroine, and also depending on how many children she has and she raised, the award, the payment of benefits would increase. Okay, so again, it's becoming increasingly popular for women to focus on work instead of childbearing and child rearing. But a landmark shift in family life was revealed by statistics earlier that year, which showed that more than half of women are still childless at the age of 30, and they continue to pursue their careers instead of opting to have children. So we continue to see a delay in childbearing, with women born in 1990s becoming the first cohort where half of the women remain childless by their 30th birthday, and the level of childlessness by the age of 30 have been steadily rising since a low of 18% for women born in 1941. So some statistics from medical journals suggest their lower levels of fertility in those currently in their 20s also indicate that this trend is likely to continue. And the average number of children born to a woman has been below 2 for women born since 1950s. And while two-child families are still most common, seemingly, women have recently completed their childbearing age are more likely than their mother's generation to have only one child or none at all. So the question is, what is the reason for this? Why do some women choose career over children? And one of the reasons is that some mothers are just simply not ready. So they would like to enjoy freedom, travel around the globe, find their place within life. And that said, they're not opposed to the idea of motherhood. They just simply need to take some time to make sure that motherhood is something meaningful to them, rather than something that what they do to fulfill the social pressure and the pressure from their family. The career progression was named as one of the key reasons for that. So they're not ready for distractions. They really want to climb up the career ladder, and this is mostly the case for those who work on big money cases. They also don't want to be seen as bad parents. They don't want to be judged by their neighbors if they don't have time to come to the open lessons of their children, and they don't want to be judged for the fact that they come home quite late. Financial side, so that is quite linked to career consideration. Financial side is also a very big consideration. Raising children is not cheap. Therefore, the families seek to firstly become financially sustainable and then decide to have children. So this brings us to a very important issue. So it's relatively common for women to change their minds later in their lives about children, so later at the stage of their career. In some professions, it's quite common for women to be concerned with disfiguring their bodies, so we might think of ballet dancers and actresses. However, one of the most common problems that's being faced by women later is infertility. So infertility affects 48.5 million couples worldwide, and this trend is expected to increase. And the chances of infertility increase after the age of 35. So the question is, can surrogacy help here? And for surrogacy is becoming increasingly popular, especially in the celebrity world. So some celebrities, including Sofia Vergara, who's suffering from infertility, offered for surrogacy. So what does surrogacy mean? So in Latin, it means substitute. So this is an arrangement where a woman carries a child for the intended parents, and there are a few types of surrogacy. So we've got the traditional, the intended father or donor genetic material is used, plus the genetic material of a surrogate. So this type of surrogacy is not very popular because this means that the surrogate mother will be genetically related to the child. There is also gestational type. So in this case, the intended father's genetic material is used, or it could be the donor genetic material, plus the intended mother's donor and eggs. So this means the surrogate has absolutely no genetic connection to the child. It's also commercial surrogacy, where surrogate will be remunerated beyond reasonable expenses. So it's either lump sum or periodic payment. Sometimes it could be both. Or altruistic, so thereby a surrogate is compensated by no more than reasonable expenses, so it could be medical bills, food, transport, etc. Commercial surrogacy is illegal in many states, including in the UK, accordance with Section 1 of the Surrogacy Arrangements Act 1985, but altruistic surrogacy is allowed. So it is seen as something very good, and it is less frowned upon by the society. So the question is surrogacy ethically controversial? And of course, there is a wide diversity of opinions coming from academic scholars, coming from the society as well. And the answer is yes, it could be. Some of the most common objections is related to commercial surrogacy. So once this financial element steps into consideration, surrogacy seems to be transformed into an evil arrangement. So some of the most common objections is that commercial surrogacy is psychologically traumatizing for surrogate mothers. And commercial surrogacy is also quite exploitative, and it reduces the child to an object of a sale. Whilst this might be true considerations, this doesn't really explain why altruistic surrogacy is less frowned upon, because it can be equally traumatizing as the commercial one. It is the very idea that the surrogate mother has to relinquish the child, has to give the child to the intended parents, that should be the key consideration here. Also, the data suggests that once paid, the surrogates see the arrangement as work. And in permissive states, surrogates are quite generously remunerated. The child in return obtains a very loving family. But that said, there are some instances, of course, where the child ends up in not such a good environment, in the case of abusive intended parents. But this could happen to a child who was born in a traditional way, and fortunately, these cases are quite rare. So is surrogacy completely unproblematic? In short, no. It does sometimes, it may give rise to various practical and ethical issues, potential exploitation of a surrogate, physical as well as psychological. The process of matching a surrogate with the intended parents might also be quite difficult. So it looks in a way like dating, and it might be the case that the surrogate and the intended parents just don't click. So in some liberal jurisdictions, the surrogate might be legally allowed to keep the child she carried. So the Russian Federation is one of the liberal jurisdictions, but by law, the surrogate is the legal mother because she carried and gestated the child. So she is allowed to keep the child. Some intended parents could reject the child with certain genetic conditions, and there's also a risk of imperfect arrangements whereby the intended parents are stuck in a legal quagmire. So the most common issue arises where a couple entered into surrogacy arrangement in a permissive state, but they are nationals or residents of a state where surrogacy is not recognized or prohibited. So where does this bring us in terms of the mini conclusion? So the practice of surrogacy itself is not really a novelty, but its widespread illegality has recently become increasingly questioned. The search for justification is arguably exacerbated by the rapidly declining fertility rates and decreasing numbers of children ready for adoption. The trend has also been reinforced by the sharply increasing number of international surrogacy arrangements, as well as the front cover celebrities engaging in surrogacy arrangements more often. The recognition of surrogacy as fertility treatment has also prompted some workplaces to offer what is called surrogacy benefits to retain the talent. So some admit they have dedicated their lives to build a career and become financially stable to provide for a child until they realize it was too late. However, since its emergence, surrogacy has also been assailed as diversion from traditional life scripts, blamed for the exploitation of women in states where it's permitted, and condemned for negatively affecting children in international transactions. Despite potential pitfalls, however, surrogacy recognizes the right to procreate and as universal and indiscriminatory. So it is unique in a sense that it provides infertile and same-sex couples, single parents, as well as those who lost their loved ones with the only opportunity to have genetically related offspring. And the majority of surrogacy arrangements do end successfully, with the happy intended parents receiving the child and the surrogate obtaining the compensation. So this is it from me today, and thanks for listening.